So recently, a YouTuber named Naked Ape did a video called Bernie Sanders is a fucking moron. It was a nice 10-minute video, humorous, that was about the title, pretty much. And then, shortly afterwards, another YouTuber named The Amazing Atheist, also known as TJ, did a response video called Bernie Sanders is not a moron, and this is my response video to TJ. With religion so exposed and belittled these days, stripped of any potential goodness or benefit it may have, and all of its faults laid bare for everyone to see, with religion so demonized, I think that this leaves a vacuum in its wake. And as you may know, nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. And this vacuum of belief, this vacuum you may know as atheism, in some cases can be filled with reason, logic, philosophy. In other cases, sadly, it is simply replaced by another superstitious and irrational worship. Worship at the altar of state power. The idea that not a man in robes, but very differently, a man in a suit and tie, can simply flick his magical pen wand and solve problems and offer absolution just by passing laws. No need to really consider the nuances of how these problems will be solved. You know, we just need the magical spells, the laws, the regulations, and then everything falls into place. Just a flick of the wrist and a swish of the magic pen. And voila, the world's problems are solved. And I think that this is what has happened to TJ, the Amazing Atheist. Because while he may be too smart and too hip and too cool to believe in anything as silly as Jesus, he sure does believe something.
I do believe it.
So let's get started and unpack some Berniality dogma from this interesting gentleman in his hood with his too spooky for you lighting.
I have no animosity towards Naked Ape
Whatsoever.
I'm going to refrain from personal attacks and instead focus solely on the substance.
Wait a minute.
Naked Ape is a fucking moron.
Naked Ape is a fucking moron.
Okay, guys, this is off to a good start, eh?
He's had a job for 30 years. I don't think anyone can deny Bernie Sanders' work ethic. I'm sorry.
The hippie commune that, by all reports, seems to have kicked Bernie off for being too much of a laze-ass, would probably disagree when you say that no one can deny Bernie's work ethic. I have a hard time imagining how you could think that's not an issue, that he didn't have a job until he was 40. Who cares? It's kind of an issue for people who actually work through their life.
Look, the fact is that Bernie Sanders is one of the lowest income earners in the Senate, and this is because he didn't take massive amounts of money from big business like all of his bought and paid for fucking colleagues.
You know what? I actually want to jump in here and tell you that I really agree. I think that this is a very fair thing to point out. And if we're being honest, this is Bernie's appeal. I think it might be his single largest appeal because there's truth here, right? This is why reasonable people get swept up on the feel the burn train, because it really is the truth. Despite his 3 houses, Bernie, Amazing Atheist, is right. Bernie doesn't take as much money as most. And I personally get the impression that he really genuinely believes the things he is trying to sell you, the ideas he's trying to sell you. And I could be wrong, but that's the impression I get. Yeah, I think it's a powerful point for Bernie. I have some amount of respect for a man that can stand so strongly behind his ideas. Now, in this part of the video, Amazing Atheist goes on for several minutes attempting to rebut Naked Ape's arguments about the minimum wage. Does not do a very good job. So we're going to fast forward a bit because Amazing Atheist eventually comes to the conclusion that all these numbers are basically meaningless because they don't support his position. So let's get into that.
The states that raised their minimum wage had lower unemployment than the ones that didn't. Now, there are many variables at play here, so I can't say with any certainty that these states did better on unemployment because of the minimum wage increase.
And that is correct. You don't want to make any irrational jumps from correlation to causation, especially on such a broad and nuanced issue with so many variables.
But it certainly didn't hurt them.
What? I think that this is a fundamental misunderstanding here, or at least a brain fart of exactly how this scientific principle works. The logic of correlation causation that we just talked about applies to whether or not the minimum wage law hurt the states as well. You are simply not analyzing enough data, if it is even possible, as you admit to draw good conclusions here. You don't get to draw selective conclusions either when it suits your narrative. It certainly didn't hurt them is just false. The data does not show that at all, especially when you include words like certainly. It certainly didn't hurt them. What?
There are a lot of variables at play here, but the point is there seems to be little to no effect on unemployment rates from raising the minimum wage.
Nonsense. Just because you can't make sense of the data does not mean there aren't any effects. If we think with our common sense brain here for a moment, instead of our trying to analyze a bunch of word salad numbers brain, surely we can just agree, as two reasonable adults, that there would of course be effects from raising the minimum wage such a large amount. Now, it may be hard to draw a conclusion about the overall efficacy of the program from the data, but that doesn't mean there's no effect.
Paying even $1 more per Big Mac would be totally acceptable as a side effect.
Wow, it would be totally acceptable to pay $1 more for a Big Mac, huh? Well, that's awful easy for you to say, isn't it, buddy? You don't look particularly hungry there to me, and perhaps that is part of the reason you identify with Bernie, because you have lived such a privileged life. And you know what? You probably wouldn't have any problem paying an extra $1. You can't see a reason why anyone would. I mean, perhaps you really identify with Bernie when he says his ridiculous things like,
When you're white, you don't know what it's like to be living in a ghetto. You don't know what it's like to be poor.
perhaps something you aren't considering is that the poorest, worst off people in the country are actually those without jobs at all. Not the people making minimum wage, which are not doing particularly well, admittedly, but the people without jobs at all. For those people, for whatever reason they don't have a job, very down on their luck at the moment, who knows, but for whatever reason, for those people, I can promise you, paying an extra $1 for their Big Mac, paying a few extra percentage points on all their groceries, on the things that they purchase, is going to make a very, very big impact in their lives. You know, they just might have a different view of just how easy that extra $1 is to find. Very clear you're coming from a position of immense privilege when you talk about that.
Now, there are other threats posed to these jobs by things like automation, but those threats are going to exist regardless of the wages being paid to employees. That is, unless we enact some sort of legislation that's anti-automation, which I have mixed feelings about, but that's really a totally different topic.
Automation and the employment of low-skilled people are just like totally different issues? Really, bud? I don't think you have thought this one through at all with your Valley Girl eye roll. I understand that you're not a business owner, clearly, but let's try a thought exercise and pretend for a second. If Lord and Savior Bernie Sanders waves his magic wand and passes some legislation forcing you, Mr. Business Owner, to suddenly pay your employees twice as much money, double it, as much money as you're paying employees, do you think that you might A, be more likely to pursue automation technology after the price of labor has doubled, or B, less likely to pursue automation technology now that the price of labor has doubled? Surely, we both know the answer. If it costs twice as much money to hire the same low-skilled workers you have now, those fancy-dancy robots start to look a lot more appealing. You will absolutely have to write more laws to stop technology if you don't want those low-skilled people to be forced out of their job. Now let's just say that again. Stop technology. You'd have to pass technology laws. You have to pass laws inhibiting the progress of humankind as a species. Modern day book burning, okay? Only someone with true religious fervor in their ideology could even consider countenancing such a thing. And I realize you say you have mixed feelings, so I'll give you a pass on this one. Maybe you'll come back and be like, oh no, what I said when I said I had mixed feelings is I meant I would never support that. Good. I hope you hedge like that, because absolutely no one with even a semblance of intelligence should even consider supporting laws that inhibit the technological progress of humankind. That is absolutely barbaric and primitive. It's on the level of burning books because they say the wrong things, we don't like it. But you know, hey, maybe what I'm not understanding is that with Lord and Savior Bernie at the helm of the ship, well, what could go wrong? I'm sure it would be a super fair and balanced law. Lord Bernie would do it right.
Let's then tie the minimum wage to inflation and to cost of living, so that we never need to have this stupid debate again. It'll just automatically go up as it needs to every year.
So you may not know this, but inflation is what happens when the government inflates, keyword, the current supply of money with new bills. Like literal printing presses, reams of paper just like pushing out new bills. And did you know that if we try to provide just this big glut of free stuff for everyone, that inflation is going to go up more? Thought I would share that. I'm curious if you have heard of any times in history that has happened previously. Have you ever studied these things? If you're familiar with the outcomes at all. And if you are drawing a blank on what I'm saying, on, historical parallels, then I would point you to places like Zimbabwe, the Weimar Republic, ancient Rome. These could be fun stuff to Google. Could be some fun history for you to learn. What happens with runaway inflation?
Well, here's the reality. The average age of a person working a minimum wage job right now is 35 years old. In 1979, 27% of minimum wage workers were teenagers. But by 2013, only 12% of minimum wage workers were teenagers.
Where are you pulling these numbers from, atheist? You link no sources or citations in your 30-minute presentation here. Not in the bottom. I looked around. If I'm looking in the wrong place, geez, please let me know. But it seems like you completely neglected to link any sources or citations. So I looked it up for you because I started to question these things. And what I found was a bit different. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's a government organization in charge of keeping track of these things, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for 2014 paints a different picture. The BLS tells me that for 2014, 21.4% of workers at or below minimum wage were 16 to 19 years old. 48.2% of all minimum wage or below workers were 16 to 24. 25 to 34-year-olds are an additional 22.4%. Once you start getting into 35 to 44-year-old age bracket, those are only 11% of the minimum wage workers. And somehow you want to tell me a figure that I couldn't verify, that 35 is the average age of a minimum wage employee, and maybe that's somehow correct? I guess, looking at these numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I can't square that with these, but maybe I'm evaluating the data wrong. Let me know. What this shows is that 35 to 44-year-olds are only 11% of the minimum wage workers, and brackets after that drop off very steeply. 45 to 54 was like 9%, after that was like 6%, so it dropped off very steeply very quickly. And to be honest, I would consider it a
lie of omission.
That you don't show the reality of the data. Most minimum wage workers are younger people. Reality. I don't even think that, personally, I don't think that's a particularly important part of the argument against a minimum wage law, but that's what you're rebutting because that's what Naked Ape used. And while he was dramatic in making that point, he was not exactly incorrect, was he?
The minimum wage isn't really enough to live on. The incomes of minimum wage workers are supplemented by social programs that are paid for by tax dollars. For instance, 52% of fast food workers are on some form of public assistance. 46% of childcare workers, 48% of home care workers. And here's the real bitch of a statistic. 56% of government assistance is going to people from working families at a cost of about $70 or $80 billion a year to the taxpayers.
So the current government programs aren't enough. That variety of government welfare isn't working. So what we should do is have the government force those greedy corporations to provide the welfare instead. The problem isn't the welfare for people who don't need it. Oh no. The problem is that the government just isn't involved enough. I mean, maybe we could tax the companies less and let them have more money to pay their employees. No! I say double down, more taxes, more regulations, force the companies to pay for the welfare too. Of course, phrases like greedy corporations actually covers every single business in America because a federal minimum wage is non-discriminate. It targets all businesses. But, I mean, sure, hey, let's just continue with the phrase greedy corporations. Because I'm really sure all the little mom and pop businesses will have a really super easy time paying their employees nearly twice as much money. Yeah, because they're all just greedy business people, obviously sitting on their hoarded treasure and gold.
Bernie Sanders' plan was to tax trades at 0.5% for stocks and 0.1% for bonds, which does raise the cost of investing, but it also makes it harder for high-frequency traders to game the system by using computer-generated high-speed trading to their advantage.
Wow. Good job channeling Bernie here, man. I heard you say that in Bernie's voice. Which was entertaining for me because it's clearly right out of his mouth. The computer generated high-speed frequency trading taking advantage.
The average person isn't selling and trading stocks all day hoping to eke every penny out of the market that they can. The average investor makes investments and waits for them to grow.
Unfortunately, this is just a fundamental misunderstanding you have here. According to a 2016 Gallup poll, 52% of Americans say they have money invested in the stock market. So these things are going to impact more than half of all Americans directly, not to mention indirect. And while the financial tax in the way that Bernie proposes it would certainly impact the high-frequency traders more than the low-frequency traders, it is non-discriminate and it affects the low-frequency traders as well. Not as much, obviously, but it affects them. And Naked Ape does a good job pointing out how even a seemingly small 0.5% tax can really add up when we're talking about just a few small percentage points of potential profit for people in good years. And what about when the market goes bad? It's not such a magic money scheme as I think you think. And almost more importantly, I think, is how it's going to affect low-frequency traders. Because it's not just costing them a little bit extra money, okay? Something you're clearly not thinking about is that it's going to limit and constrain their decisions. And I think this is an important point. Let me give you a thought experiment. What if you invested in a company? You did a little research, you actually liked them, seemed like a good company doing good things, and you got a little bit of money, and you want to invest your money, and you say, hey, I'm gonna invest it in this company. But then that company is either outed by a journalist, or it kind of maybe the company even, let's paint a dramatic picture. The company comes out publicly in support of something insane and ridiculous that you find abhorrent and detestable. Again, let's paint an extreme example and say that the company comes out in support of female genital mutilation. Just something crazy. Do you realize that you're going to be penalized by the government if you turn around and decide that, oh, I want to sell that stock now? Oh, well, turns out, buddy, you're turning into a high-frequency trader. You better make the right decision the first time, TJ, because if you mess up in your investment and then you discover that a company is actually being incredibly immoral, well, you're kind of locked in. Because as Naked Ape points out, if you buy and sell a stock more than 2 or 3 times during the year with this type of tax, you're probably going to lose money, okay? And so now you're holding the stock to this company that's maybe in support of female genital mutilation, and instead of just being able to drop the stock and give them a big fuck you to teach them a lesson, but now it's going to cost you money. You might not make any return on your investment this year because you had to drop that company's stock. And yeah, shame on you for picking the wrong company. But do we really want to limit consumer freedom and consumer choice? Surely there's another way to do these things. And I will point out for you something that Naked Ape points out as well that I feel like you gloss over a bit, which is that high frequency traders are simply going to move their trading to a more lucrative market with less fees, okay? No one is going to do these trades where they're scraping to get, it's called scalping, by the way. I understand you don't know too much about this, but when you talk about people making a penny here and a penny there, it's a type of trading called day trading. It's called scalping specifically, and it's making little profits off trades. It's an extremely competitive market right now already between brokerages based on the fee that they charge. Kind of obviously, when you're just trying to scalp little bits of money from transactions, a big fee makes it extremely hard to make any money. And so the traders already go to the brokerage with the lowest fees to do their scalping. And you really think that if the US passes some big flat tax on these transactions, that those traders are not going to take their scalping business to a Chinese exchange or a Russian exchange or a European exchange of some kind? They'll just take their business elsewhere. Really simple. And while you gloss over this too, Naked Ape points out that right when Sweden tried this, 90% plus of their trading volume just disappeared, vanished. Because who wants to trade with all these extra fees? Nobody. Sorry, I gotta take the hoodie off, despite it making me look ultra cool and hip. To continue on a bit with my last thought, you don't just get to wave your magic wand and cast a spell that says, 0.5% tax! The math says that's $11 trillion! We can pay for the world with that! Because life doesn't work like that, Bernie, TJ. You impose that kind of tax and you get significantly less than the math projects in revenue. The current trading volume the US enjoys would logically, commonsensically diminish substantially if we were to tax it at a higher rate. And while you kind of acknowledge this, and you allude to how Bernie's math during the election accounted for up to a 50% reduction in trading, and the numbers were still enough to pay for his free college bullshit. What you're not considering here is twofold. A 50% reduction in trading would hurt another of other income streams that you're not considering. For example, all the US brokerages that are already taking fees from traders, people doing this trading already pay fees. They pay them to the brokerages. The brokerages already pay taxes, and that is a revenue stream that you are ignoring, okay? But that revenue stream will basically dry up and disappear if you implement this tax and you get a 50% reduction in trading. Oh, so we just half the tax in half and it's still enough. Look, it's still a lot of money. And you're just not taking into account all the different factors. Like what about the money that the companies were paying taxes on? And it would be really hard to do the math on that. It's a lot easier to just cut the number in half and say it still works. It looks better. Well, I agree. And just one more time, I will point out, as Naked Ape pointed out, that when Sweden tried to implement this type of financial tax, it lost over 90% of the trading volume. Not 50%, 90%. And I don't think that's unrealistic. When you know how trading works, and you know how easy it is to be like, hey, which brokerage should I sign up on? This one or this one? And you type in a different web address. That's all it takes. It's not like these people have to go through some hoops and jumps and no, they're going to type in a different web address for their brokerage and then boom, they are not going to have to pay these ridiculous transaction fees.
In my opinion, basically parasites in the first place. They don't actually invest in things. They just exploit the market. Their money is never in one place long enough for it to be considered a real investment. It's like if I have a company and I'm holding $1 and you give me $1, like here's $1, and then the company grows enough for the dollar to be worth $1.01, and then you're like, give me it back. And then you go to someone else and do the same fucking scam. You just collect a bunch of pennies here and there. You're not an actual fucking investor at that point. You're just an exploiter.
Parasites, huh? TJ, this section of your video really makes it abundantly clear that you have no clue what you're talking about. And as nice a way as it's possible to say that, I'm trying to say that in the nicest possible way. I just have to be blunt about that. Because look, man, while I don't have, admittedly, the same level of respect for the career of day trader as I do a fireman or a doctor or something, it's not nearly as bad as it seems, okay? First of all, you are quite clearly investing in things. Just because you move your money around or because you flip your initial investment does not mean that there's not an initial investment, okay? In the investing world, they have terms like seed money. But if you save a bunch of money to invest in the stock market, I don't give a shit what you do with it at that point. You are clearly still investing in things. So it's pretty unfair and disingenuous of you to just say, they're just not investing in anything. They're parasites. And it's not only unclear and disingenuous, it shows a lack of understanding, okay? Because money is still being injected into companies which are using the money to grow, to buy new machinery, to hire more employees, to grow their business, okay? That is how the stock market works. There is real, genuine value being provided, okay? And there is parasitism too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that there's parasitism in just about all industries, all walks of life, and the stock market is not immune. But your primary understanding really is exposed here in your ridiculously simplistic analogy.
And then you're like, give me it back.
The part where you say, this is your misunderstanding, TJ. There is no violence involved, okay? There is no gimme. There is no demand. There is no force, okay? There is only willing participants in a trade where two people want what the other person has more than what they have themselves. To correct your analogy, it's like you sell me a share of your company for $1. Then your company grows. It's worth $1.01. Then I sell my stock in the company for $1.01. Importantly, either back to you or to someone else. Whoever wants it, TJ. It's an important part, okay? I don't demand your money back. Give it back. No, we don't demand things. We put our items in capitalism out on display on a shelf with a price tag to see if any fish will bite. That's how capitalism works. That's essentially how the stock market works, okay? You don't just get to buy a stock and then say, oh, hey, I want to give it back. I want my money back so I can make more pennies. No, dude, you buy and sell things, okay? This is the fundamentals of capitalism. And, and then perhaps after I have sold the stock for $1.01, your company doesn't do so well, and it drops the next day back to $1 even. And then maybe I go and I buy a stock again with the thought that it's going to go up again. And then when it gets to $1.01, I sell it again to someone who wants to buy it, okay? And this I cannot emphasize enough. If you can buy and sell a stock a bunch of times throughout the day, high frequency trading, it is only for one reason, TJ, Bernie. There were people who wanted deeply, genuinely, to sell it to you and to buy it from you, okay? No force involved. They wanted it at various prices throughout the day. They wanted it. They wanted those stocks more than their money. Now, was it a higher price than what you paid a few minutes ago? Did you make a penny or two? Well, if you did your job as a trader, yeah, that's exactly how it works. Now, is it really such an evil thing to sell something for a profit? To buy and flip something for a profit? When you have no experience doing it, and you just have this conjured up image of demonic, evil, greedy people, maybe you think it is. Allow me to paint a different picture though, because you can call it parasitism if you like, but I would say that flipping things for a profit is a absolutely beautiful, beautiful part of capitalism. One that has enabled beautiful and amazing things to happen in the world. And a farmer's market that I go to provides a real world example for us. So an old farmer comes to market once a month. He's old, he lives far away, he doesn't have time to get out, and he just mostly wants to chill at his house and grow his trees. So he only comes to farmer's market once a month to sell his beautiful juicy limes, wonderful organic limes. But he just doesn't have time to come more regularly than once a month. Now, there's not a lot of other people selling limes. In fact, basically never. So if you want local limes, you got to get them from this guy, but it's so rare. And so, a clever, enterprising young woman buys his excess limes at the end of the day every month when he comes, and then she has some to sell during some of the other days of the month when this guy isn't here. And the man normally charges $1 per lime, but the woman charges $1.25 per lime after she marks them up. Now, is that such a horrible thing? Do you see how it might even be a valuable service to invest in something and to provide it, even if the only goal is to flip it quickly for a profit? Now, I understand this analogy could be taken to a dark place, and certainly dark things happen in capitalism, but in this situation it's not dark, and there are very good examples of this, where just nice positive stuff is happening that's clearly beneficial for everyone. The farmer prefers to sell his limes on one day when he comes. That's his point of coming to the farmer's market, to make a little bit of money from his lime crop. He doesn't want to do the farmer's market every day. He's got a bunch of lime trees. He just wants to sell his extra limes. So when the farmer comes and the woman wants to buy all his excess limes, he's overjoyed. He's like, oh my God, I sold out all my limes today. Fantastic. He gives them over voluntarily, not under force, happily. And the woman also is very, very happy to buy them, because she can make a profit, obviously. She's going to make $0.25 per lime. And what about the customers? Well, the customers are also overjoyed. They're fucking stoked. They're happy. The customers come into the market and they're happy to pay $1.25, because before they didn't even have the option of buying limes for most of the month. Right? Occasionally they get the old guy's limes, and they still have options of that one time a month. But the rest of the month, if you want to make some margaritas or something, you go get some fresh, nice limes. And now, sure, they're slightly more expensive, but it's compared to not having access to them at all. Normally, limes are hard to find. So literally no one is unhappy in this specific example, okay? And yet, this series of transactions is functionally no different from most trading in the stock market, from what TJ seems to have a problem with. This, you buy a stock for $1 and you flip it for an extra penny, and that's parasitism. It's fundamentally the same thing, okay? We cannot demonize all trade between people just because maybe some people do it with ill intent. Some people do everything with ill intent, okay? And you can't use that to just take away from what is just functional, normal systems of trade between people. And I would further say, that can you maybe see how these types of trading, this type of behavior, might actually be what makes the entire world go round? I mean, while you may not agree with or understand using technology to trade stocks, it's not quite as demonic as you seem to think. And to be honest, for someone who's not religious, you have quite a flair for the dramatic to demonize such a simple behavior so much.
About the Swedish financial transaction tax. that was enacted from 1984 to 1991, which was similar to Bernie's plan and which was disappointing in terms of generating revenue. That's why they got rid of it. It was a failure. You're right. But actually, you got to take a little bit broader of a perspective than that than just pointing like this. It didn't work here, so it won't ever work. Because actually, financial transaction taxes are pretty fucking common these days. In 2011, there were 40 countries who had such taxes in effect, and these taxes generated $38 billion in revenue.
Buddy, what kind of fucking logic is this? Because some other countries did it. Other countries did it. And, well, so that's why it's good, because other people did it. Can you imagine if I tried to use this logic with you to support the argument of Jesus or Christianity or religion or something? Well, because look, all these other countries support Jesus, they worship Jesus, so 40 countries, that can't be wrong. It's a worthless argument, right? I can't even, but I do have to go a little further and debunk what you're saying about this 40 countries figure, because I looked into it a bit, especially considering the lack of your sources and citations for anything else, and I found where you got this from, buddy. You pulled it from Wikipedia without bothering to check the sources, and the source listed on the Wiki page is actually a blog which has no sources given from some chick at politico.eu. The only real data I can find leads me to believe that this is actually a cobbled together, biased piece of bullshit information that, once you actually dig deeper to see where it comes from, seems to actually oppose this argument. The source for this seems to say, in reality, it's from a 2015 report from the Congressional Research Service, which I will link below, which says something very importantly different. It says, at least 40 countries, currently or previously, have had financial transaction taxes. Okay, 40 countries currently or previously, meaning including all the ones that stopped doing it because it was a failure, like Sweden. They are included in that list. You think that could be important to include, Wikipedia? Yeah, I think it could be important to include. And this is a good lesson for everyone, I think, in not blindly trusting Wikipedia. Because if you were making the mistake of doing that to begin with. Because, unfortunately, people really like copy-pasting things from unsourced blogs and making them look a lot like fact with a nice little superscripted notation mark at the end, as if that somehow makes it a fact. It's really, really important to do some basic journalism to verify questionable claims, okay? Especially when you have a voice, you have a platform, you have 1 million subscribers listening to your bullshit. Maybe you should put in a little fucking effort instead of just trying to collect that easy paycheck, bud. And just randomly, something I came across that I would like to throw in here is I'm not the only person to have these types of opinions about the financial transaction tax. The UK's Economic Subcommittee of the House of Lords, regarding Europe's financial transaction tax proposal, said the financial transaction tax is likely to induce a loss in GDP between 5 and 20 times larger than the revenues raised from the tax. So not only will a financial transaction tax, according to the Economic Subcommittee of the UK, not only will it be ineffective at generating revenue, it will actually make us lose 5 to 20 times as much revenue as it will gain. Not twice as much, not 3 times as much, 5 to 20 times. That is a fairly big number. Now maybe they are just so far off base. I don't think so, guys. And that's what, in our interesting polarized world, that's what's going on. You have people over here saying that it will cause us to lose 5 to 20 times as much money as it gains. And you have people over here on Bernie's side saying, you just flick the wand and you pass the magic law. And then we're going to get all this money from the Wall Street speculators. We're going to pay for everything. It's that polarized. And one of these people is very, very wrong. I'm going to leave it to you at the end of this presentation to decide who it is.
I don't pretend for a minute to understand the intricacies of Sweden's financial system or any other country's fucking financial system for that matter.
Okay. I mean, I suppose you can say that you don't claim to understand the intricacies, but you speak quite emphatically on the subject for 30 minutes here for someone with no understanding of it. You know, to be honest with you, TJ, it probably would have been good, just maybe, to put a disclaimer at the beginning of your video so less people like me wasted their time, okay? You could just say at the beginning, this video is all about my opinions about economic issues like the minimum wage, free college, financial transaction tax. But just so you know, I don't claim to understand the intricacies of any country's financial system. So I'm going to give my opinion about all this shit, but I don't claim to understand the intricacies. I mean, you know, if you would have said that at the beginning, I suspect people would take you a little fucking less seriously, which, to be frank, is quite warranted.
But I'm very confused by your argument.
I can tell, buddy. I can tell.
You're saying that free college is a bad idea because poor people and successful people are going to foot the bill somehow? Okay.
Wow. This about sums it up, folks. That dismissive Valley Girl eye toss thing that he does there, like the notion of giving away billions of dollars of free taxpayer money, like the idea of that having any effect on either the poor or successful people, that's just so contemptible and beneath the amazing atheist. I mean, eye roll. Oh my God. It is quite clear that you're pretty fucking dumb if you believe that.
Okay, so Bernie's proposal is to use the aforementioned tax on Wall Street speculation to offset the majority of costs associated with free college tuition for everybody.
Way to channel Bernie, buddy. I literally am hearing this in his voice as you say it. It's pretty funny. The proposal is to use the aforementioned tax on Wall Street speculation to offset the majority of cost associated with free college tuition for everybody. Okay.
Successful people, yeah, they'll be footing the bill if they're Wall Street speculators. And I'm pretty okay with that. I don't see why anyone wouldn't be okay with that.
Well, okay, buddy. Let me try to explain some issues with this. Who wouldn't be okay with this? First, what exactly does Wall Street speculator mean to you? Right? If we're defining our terms, do you know exactly what that might encompass? What do you think that encompasses? Do you realize that investing a few $100 in some company that you believe in would make you a Wall Street speculator? But further, a substantial problem comes when we realize that the government is already effectively forcing people to invest in the stock market. As Naked Ape points out, and you seem to gloss over, as with so many other points, 401ks are a prominent example of this. Because the government says, hey, do you want to save money without being taxed super heavily? Okay, well, stick it in your 401k. And there you go. Now you're a Wall Street speculator. Because in case you didn't know, 401k, stock market. Okay? So government forcing people to put money in the stock market. That is a kind of important thing to keep in mind in this whole context. The idea that because you have a 401k mandated by the government to help your retirement means that now we should just tax your money perhaps a bit more because you're clearly a greedy bastard. That doesn't follow for me. Because the phrase for you, TJ, Wall Street speculator, is able to garner enough hatred and contempt, you're fine with stealing, which is what it is, with stealing money from this group of people, these greedy speculators, to pay for everyone's college degree. This is what you convinced yourself of. You don't think it will have impact on anyone else. Just simply speculators will foot the bill. And I got a wild and crazy idea for you, guy. Something to consider. What if one of these greedy speculators uses the money he makes investing in the stock market from his speculation to fund a business venture? Blowing minds here yet? I'm going to continue. Have you ever considered shit like this? That smart, ambitious men taking big risks with their money might be taking other big risks in life? Did you think maybe that if we start taking money, stealing money from smart men doing entrepreneurial things, men good at managing money and seeing larger systems as a whole, taking advantage of them, who are able to look past individual components? Do you think if you take the money from these smart men and redistribute it blindly to every Tom, Dick, Harry, Sally, and Sue for basket weaving and gender studies classes, that it will not have any impact on society? Is that really what you think? You are woefully naive. Taking money from smart people and redistributing it blindly because you came up with a label for these smart people that makes you mad enough to do it, it's just wrong, okay? To say that no one else would foot the bill is madness. You can say it would be better if you want, but there would be bills to foot, buddy, let me tell you. What if a speculator, for example, well, another thought experiment, speculator uses the money he makes from speculation to open a new plant or a factory or a store or expands whatever his current business is. He tries to expand it in some way. But then, boom, Bernie comes, waves his magic wand, financial transaction tax. Now, times are tough. Now that guy's not making as much money. Now, he's closing that new factory or that new store. You just can't afford it. So big fat sorry to all the people who are lined up to work there with a steady job. Sorry, but hey, don't worry though, because college is free now, right? Hooray! Well, I mean, hooray, I guess. Unless maybe you're not that smart. Unless you have an IQ of 85 and you don't have much hope of becoming an engineer, of becoming a doctor, right? You don't have much hope of doing anything except labor or service jobs. For that person, you have clearly just fucked them out of a job, and they are most definitely footing part of the bill along with the speculator, okay? Poor people and successful people would obviously, clearly foot the bill for such a tax. And if you have a rebuttal to this situation I just laid out, I would love to hear it, because I don't think it's possible. I think the situation I just laid out would literally play out dozens, if not hundreds of times in the first day after a financial transaction tax was passed. I'm going to be making this much less money? Okay, I guess I won't open that next factory. That is how people think, buddy. So if you don't want new businesses, new stores, new factories, just keep taking money from the rich people and they'll quit building them.
We should be number one in education, number one in healthcare, number one in freedom of the press, number one in literacy, and we should have the most educated workforce. Instead, we're number one in incarceration. We used to be number one in obesity, but I guess Mexico and maybe a few other countries have passed us. Number one in divorce, number one in car thefts, number one in people on prescription drugs, number one in women who are on antidepressants, number one in student debt. Number one in student debt. Another good reason to make college free. Don't you think? I mean, Naked Ape, you voted for the guy who wants to make America great again, right? Well, explain to me how we can be great if we're stupid.
I agree, right? Where we disagree, I think, is the solution. I think that the solution to this problem is incredibly complex, nuanced, and will require effort on many, many different fronts. Research too, but effort on many fronts to accomplish. Okay, we need to raise the IQ of our populace, for example, which is hours of discussion in itself, the best way to do that, from breastfeeding to diet for children, to not spanking children, to how we educate children, so much stuff, right? And that's just one factor. We need to preserve our environment for our children. We also need to heat our homes, of course, and fuel our technology, our industry, our lives. There are billions of people in the world still scratching out a life for themselves with the daily back-breaking labor of subsistence farming, okay? Many millions of people tonight will burn dried cow dung that they painstakingly collected through the day to cook their meals and to stay warm. Now I ask you, TJ, how far are you willing to go to protect the environment, to improve education? How many taxes must we force people to pay? How large must the power of the state be, do you think, to accomplish number one in everything for America? And I ask you, what if it's actually unrealistic to be number one in all these categories because of things like our demographics, our geography, our unique American culture? Surely in America, we know that you don't have to be best at everything to be good, to be accepted. What if we can't simply ever compete with Korea or Japan or China for test scores again because their population has a significantly higher average IQ or other reasons? I mean, should we just continue taxing all things in America that actually do well and try to funnel that money to clearly not working well public education in the hopes of pushing that rank up a bit higher? Who, I ask you, is to make all these decisions? And I guess I know the answer. It's Lord and Savior Bernie Sanders, if you had your way. But who is to make all these decisions, TJ? And most importantly, what choice do I have if I don't want to participate? What if I don't want to pay for you to go to school? Do I have a choice? I think not. I think you are trying to deprive me of freedom, TJ, in the worst way, in the same way that I'm sure you detest religion for oppressing people throughout history, for depriving people of freedom throughout history. You should detest having a group of men, whether they are in robes or suits, to have a group of men in fancy clothes dictate your freedoms. To me, that's largely the same. Let people sort out their own affairs, okay? We don't need the parasitic ruling class to solve things. And whether they wear suits or fancy robes, it is the parasitic ruling class, TJ. And you have had the wool pulled over your eyes by some of them. And I think that the solution here is complex, but also simple, in that we need more freedom and less men in robes, or suits, less men in robes deciding things for everyone, okay? Something that I think you and me can fundamentally agree on. We need less of the parasitic ruling class deciding things for everyone. I think what you don't recognize yet is that the guys wearing robes and the guys wearing suits are the same parasitic ruling class, essentially. And personally, I see little difference between Bernie and a religious figure. He is a demigod for you, which provides literally godlike solutions. This wave of a wand, and somehow it's just going to collect money and distribute it, and it's just going to happen. It's just so super simple. Burn God can just flick his pen and cast a spell. I mean, pass a law that will force all poor people to be paid enough money to live comfortably. It's really that simple. And I mean, who wouldn't be okay with it? And you know what? Just to finish up this section, if I'm being honest and fair, I will say too that Trump is a god to many people as well. And it's not just Bernie who becomes a god for atheists, right? I don't want to be intellectually dishonest and not point that out. Trump can also, and does, become a god for some of these atheists. And I voted for Trump, so don't get me wrong, I think he's better than the other options we had for politicians, but I don't think the man is a god, and I absolutely don't want to give him godlike powers.
Number one in student debt. Another good reason to make college free.
And why, TJ, do you think student debt is so high? Perhaps because college is very expensive, maybe we should address the problem of college being very expensive before we start having the government pay for it, don't you think? Maybe before we just having the government pay all these bills, we should make sure they're not overcharging us. Just a thought. Because another way you can think about this phrase of making college free, see, another way that reasonable people might describe that is like this. Government is subsidizing college education, okay? That's another way of saying college is going to be free. Oh, government is subsidizing it. Now, why do you think is college so expensive right now? Do you think it might have anything to do with the government encouraging huge sums of money to be given out to just turned 18 foolish young people like candy? Do you think that when young people are out shopping around to spend tens of thousands of dollars of seemingly free money, that a recent study I read showed that about 49.8% of students think that they will have at least part of their loans forgiven? About half of students surveyed effectively think that they will not have to pay back the loans they are taking out. Is that not mind-blowing? 50%? Sources down below. Crazy to me. So 49% of these students think they will never have to pay back these loans. Now, do you think that young people might be being taken advantage of just a bit? Do you think that if the colleges did not have a swarm of young talented people trying to throw money at them, that they might raise their prices a little less every year? It's difficult to imagine that even though the government subsidizing colleges to such a degree has produced the expensive system we have now, that if we only increase government subsidies even more, that somehow this is going to solve the problem.
You voted for the guy who wants to make America great again, right? Well, explain to me how we can be great if we're stupid and unskilled. You might think that college is nothing but an adult daycare center, but let me ask you this. If you're boarding an airplane, do you want it designed by an aeronautic engineer or a high school dropout? If you're going into heart surgery, do you want it performed by a woman who went to medical school or some chick who binged a bunch of fucking episodes of ER and thinks she's got the general idea?
This is a very weak point, TJ, okay? Your argument here is that if we don't make college free for everyone, every pilot's gonna be untrained. Every engineer will be an idiot. Every doctor will be someone who specializes in watching ER on TV and eating waffles. This is absolutely laughable, TJ, because we don't have free college, and yet, right, we've already managed to find a way through that apparent issue. Every pilot is not an idiot. Doctors do generally know what they're doing. Somehow we've managed to figure that out, even though we don't pay for their education. It's almost like there's other systems in place. But in case it's not clear to you, no, buddy, I don't want an idiot to perform surgery on me. I want a surgeon to perform surgery on me. And do you know what I'm going to do to ensure that I receive that level of professional care? I'm going to pay for it, okay? And there, Amazing Atheist, I have explained how this all works to you, it seems. I pay her. We don't need the government to pay because I will pay. Hospitals will pay. Other doctors will pay. Through charity and apprentice-type relationships, we don't need the government and the Inquisition and the swords and the tax collectors and their violence to solve every single problem. That is, of course, unless the state is our religion and the answer to every problem, in which case there's no other lens to view things through. Speaking of myopic lenses.
Anti-intellectualism that is represented in large part by the president that you helped elect is just rat poison in our country's veins.
You misunderstand the popular sentiment, okay? The popular sentiment is not anti-intellectual. The popular sentiment is anti-politically correct, which many people would absolutely view as being anti-intellectual. But there's a very acute difference. Because there's so much disgusting politically correct bullshit wrapped up in today's academia, and more people are disgusted by it.
We are tremendously served by having an educated populace.
You know, I agree, TJ, that we are tremendously served by having an educated populace. But I don't agree that we need the government to forcibly subsidize education using the violent apparatus of the state. I think that education can exist outside that system, okay? And really, we have the proof already. When we look at a list of the countries with the top 10 scores in things like secondary mathematics, compiled from the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, sources in the description, the list of countries with top 10 scores tells us quite clearly that you don't need the government to pay for education to do well at it. In fact, it seems the opposite. Japan, for example, which maintains a top 3 ranking in almost all education measures, has a system which at first glance would seem abhorrent and perhaps terrible and cruel and greedy to you. You might even call it anti-intellectual. But the horrible evil bastards in Japan apparently force parents to even pay for public school. Gasp! Approximately 450,000 yen per year, which is roughly $3,700, for public school. Private schools, $10,000 a year or more, of course. That figure was on average, some of them almost certainly higher. And Japan, ranking top 3 in everything as far as education is concerned. Number 1 in some things. And they do not pay for everyone's education.
Tangible benefit that goes beyond just feeling entitled to free stuff. I think that a large part of the problem here is that you view free college through a very myopic lens of these entitled people who just want free stuff. And you've blinded yourself to the greater national good that comes from having a more educated workforce.
I'm not sure why you would think that. It's a pretty ridiculous straw man argument, but no, I really have not blinded myself to the need for education, okay? Absolutely ridiculous straw man position you have painted that you're arguing against. I don't know anyone thinks there's no need for education. We don't need no... Do you really, TJ, do you really honestly, truly believe that people who voted for Trump are all dumb fuck inbred hillbillies who have no interest in education? Honestly, is that what you want to paint the other side as? Do you really want to contribute to the ridiculous, polarized nature of discussion in America in such a way? It makes me sad that you would use your platform and your voice and your million subscriber audience to do such a thing.
The 3 countries with the most 25 to 34-year-olds with some college education are South Korea, Japan, and Canada.
Okay, so South Korea, Japan, and Canada don't have free college, kick ass at educating people, and you admit it, and your only response is...
You have to also foster a culture that appreciates learning and appreciates intelligence and appreciates institutions of higher education.
Well, because that's not all. We need to foster a culture of education too. You don't stop to realize at any point or be intellectually honest enough to point out that this is a killing blow to your entire argument. Your video was not about how we need to change our culture to one that promotes more education, which, you know, interesting sounding argument. Your video was all about Bernie Sanders waving a magic wand and passing magic laws that make magic free money fall from the sky. And how if you disagree with that, you hate education and you want a stupid populace. A redneck, hillbilly, accountant, doctor, engineer. That whole bullshit. And now, at the very end of your video, you want to try to hedge all of your original arguments against any criticism by saying, okay, well, yeah, the reality of the data doesn't seem to support what I'm saying at all, but that doesn't matter because of this other my feelings thing called foster a culture that appreciates learning and intelligence. It probably would have been good if you had bothered to explain to me, to explain to everyone exactly what you think it means by foster a culture that appreciates learning and intelligence. And how, importantly, you think this should happen. Because the first 95% of your video is about very specific stuff. And then at the end, you want to address specific factual data that would be problematic for you by saying general vague feeling pleasantry stuff. Very, very weak.
And acting like the SJWs that we all like to make fun of in videos somehow represent all college students. It's a disingenuous argument.
This is another just kind of weak attempt at manipulation here. You are making a straw man argument and calling it disingenuous, and I think you can do better, TJ. We both know that Naked Ape didn't say that all college students are SJWs. And SJWs represent all college students. That is a ridiculous sentiment that you have entirely made up in order to argue against. Literal definition of a straw man.
So I don't think Bernie Sanders is a moron. I think that he has very good, nuanced ideas that are carefully and painstakingly designed to solve some of the most pervasive problems facing American society.
Oh, nuanced ideas to solve world problems, huh? Let me wave my magic wand. We will have free college by taxing the corporations and the Wall Streets. Okay. Well, that's the end. That is what TJ has for us in rebutting Naked Ape's video. And I want to conclude with a little kind of recap thought of my own, I suppose. Because what an interesting phenomenon we have going on here. What an interesting, polarized discussion where people are two seemingly intelligent people are so far apart and seem to not have the ability to touch common ground at all. It's a sad reflection of how discussion is in our society as a whole right now. And my concluding thoughts on the nature of a delusional belief in the state, an almost religious belief in the state, I think this is a recurring problem today that is not going away. It quickly ends up with giving the state way too much power to solve problems, basically empowering their magic wands to no end. But they have no magic wands, okay? Only lawyers and men with guns. Because even if you think Bernie is a great, fantastic, wonderful guy, and he's not corrupt, and he's just going to make good decisions. He's a good person, which I don't necessarily disagree with. He seems like an alright guy. I mean, I think he's a little addled in the brain. I think his ideas are very poorly formulated. But he seems like an alright guy. So, even if you think he's a great, wonderful guy, once you set up a system with all these little places that the state is encouraged to suck tax money from, to steal from people, the nature of the state, which is a parasitic organization, speaking of parasitic, the nature of the state will always lead to corruption, okay? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you were able to get Bernie elected and he passed those policies, eventually he would retire or pass on. And then a new administration would be in control of this new, larger than ever state with more taxes than ever, stealing more from people than ever, having more power than ever. And sadly, I would love to be proven wrong on this. If you're watching this video, TJ, please talk to me. Sadly, I think that TJ, Amazing Atheist here, would ask me why I thought the state getting bigger was a problem. And I think he would ask that because the state has become his religion, and figures like Bernie Sanders his gods. All the ills and woes and problems of the world to be solved simply by legislation, by the flick of a pen, from some men sitting in cool-looking clothes, comfortably behind their desks. I wonder where this fantasy might stem from.
These entitled people who just want free stuff.